Hi. I don't think it worked the last time. Apurupa, if you're able to see this, I'm trying to send you an invite and it says that it's getting declined. So please tell me if it's working for you. Did it work?
Hi.
Hi.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Yeah,
Finally.
I tried to accept the request, but it would just somehow log me out of Instagram for some reason.
Oh no. All
Yeah.
right. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm good too. And I'm so excited to have you here, especially for our mental health Mela and all that it means and it stands for.
Me,
And I think,
congratulations on, organizing such a thoughtful and sensitive event.
oh,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, like
Thank,
I know that I haven't had a chance to check out any of the events yet, but I know that a bunch of my friends have been attending and they've been saying just like the best things about it. So really encourage all our audience to check out the events that are happening as a part of mental health. And some of your conversations are on your page as well, so they can, of course, since you've saved them,
yeah.
they can check it out.
And we're just trying to cover as many aspects of mental health as possible. So we've covered workplace, we've covered, peers, we've covered schools, we've covered, and we also want to cover sex and pleasure and all the taboos that, that we don't speak about.
Mhm.
So I couldn't be happier to have you talk to us and spend your time with us. For anybody who's joining and watching, I'm sure you've watched Apurupa on Instagram. You've come across her work somewhere. Apurupa is a sexuality educator. She has been a founder of bibliotherapy. She's a groups facilitator. She does a lot of work in the field through organizations like Proactive for Her or Untaboo in the past. And she's just a very dynamic person who's very interesting in the way that you put out the content and how much effort it takes, I think, really to do what a lot of us did not have access to when we were growing up, which is sex education. And to just talk about sex in a manner that's informative, educational, safe, accessible is just brilliant. So I'm so happy you're here. And welcome.
No, thank you so much. And, likewise, a big fan of your work as well. I see just how hard you work to ensure that complex often medical knowledge is simplified and accessible to folks, is trauma informed, is queer affirmative. And I see the effort that you put into, really speaking to people in a language that they understand and the heart and soul that goes into it. So, congratulations on the amazing work that you're doing as well.
Thank you. And today we're trying to talk about, the theme of the Mela is actually communities of care. And a large part of that is just society as a community also, the social space that we inhabit as citizens of just of living together, of living according to certain norms and rules and values. Some things that are thrust upon us, that are enforced, and some things that we choose. But a large part of that, I think, is also the ways in which people think about sex, because it is such a hidden topic. It is such a taboo topic that there are a lot of times we've not had the opportunity to talk about it, discuss it, think about it with others openly, unless it's peers and you're talking about, the ways in which you may have found out something. But the point being that it's never covered as equally as maybe other aspects of life, whether it's learning things in school for the purpose of becoming something in life, or it's teaching people to regulate their emotions, which also is barely done when we're talking about mental health, right? But sex in itself is such a hidden aspect of our existence that is sort of, okay, it's between you and the people that you have sex with, right? That it feels very jarring when we're met with the realities of, or we discover sex on our own because we don't know how to make sense of it as a young adult. So I'm wondering what your experience has been, Aparupa, when we're talking about, society as a community of care, when it comes to sex. Because really, for the longest time, we've been told that society has no role to play in this, and they would like to, everybody would like to wash their hands off
Yeah.
talking about sex.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you're also looking at this not just from an individual's perspective and what can an individual do to maybe address their mental health, or sexual health, or intersections of like different facets of our health, but you're also looking at how communities are actually a big part, and it's very true. Like when you think about something like marriage, which is a very communal affair, a community affair, and what is it really like when a person's of a certain age, this conversation begins on, oh, you must like think about marriage now, and you must think about a family now. What does that entail? It entails sex, right? It entails sexual behaviors, and often that piece is skipped. And actually you mentioned briefly as to how it's sort of said that sex should stay limited, sort of conversation around sex should just be between folks who are engaging in it, right? But it's not going to translate like that if there isn't open conversation on sex that is happening in non-sexual settings. It's not going to come to us in sexual settings, which is why we often also find ourselves sort of signing up for things that we're not comfortable with, or even us as perpetrators in that sense, we don't necessarily understand the other person's boundaries, and we may end up crossing it because there is no room for sexual communication of any sort. So it's again a skill that has to be built. It's something, it's a practice. It's not something that's going to come just because you're having sex with somebody, just because you've been put in a room, or you're in an intimate setting, or you love each other. None of those things will mean that you are actually able to have these conversations. So it has to actually happen in social situations with parents, or with your friends, and not just about, like you said, something that a person may have discovered, but also other things like, what about hey, my pee seems to be burning, and like seems to be burning when I'm peeing, or like my vaginal discharge looks a certain way, or I think my penis is bent a certain way. Like all these conversations need to just casually happen among people. And sex is not always sexual either, or any conversation on sex does not have to be sexual at all. Obviously, this is not to say that have conversations with people without checking with them. Very important part of any type of conversation, right? Forget sexual conversation. Even when you are we've all been in those situations where we're like, oh my god, that person's such an energy sucking vampire, because they didn't really check with me if I had the mind space, and they just dumped their trauma onto me. And we've all been in situations like that. So we do understand that it's important to check whether the other person has the mind space, is willing to engage with you on a particular topic. So similarly with this, of course, and if someone's not comfortable, they're not, and maybe it's worth questioning why majority of us are not. But having said that, yeah, when I go to schools, Aisha, or like when I work with younger folks, kids as young as like 5th grade, 4th grade want to know what it is, kissing, or like feeling a certain way, or all those conversations are happening whether or not one likes it, right? So it's also important to respond to the situation, and to respond in a way where there is intervention by adults who are invested in the healthy growth and development of these young people. And there is also regulation of the kind of information that sometimes gets passed around, and the myths that may get passed around. So yeah, so I mean, sorry, I just sort of went on a rant because it's something that I care, obviously, both of us care very deeply about. But
so much that you spoke about, that stayed with me. First of all, that sex education is not just about the act of having sex only. It's also about the functioning of the body, and just being able to talk about, understand the context of our experiences as we're growing up, as we're going through life also. like you said, to be able to talk about these things, the second thing that really stuck with me is to be able to talk about them in non-sexual settings, because there's so much fear among a lot of people that talking about sex translates into encouraging sexual behavior at a younger age and all of those kind of aspects. But the curiosity which exists for something that a lot of people experience, right, is brushed under the carpet, and then I'm wondering what kind of avenues people are left with, to satisfy that curiosity, to really understand what's happening, to make sense of experiences. And while there's so much hand holding for all other parts of our life, why not this? Because so much of this also goes into the areas of like consent, boundaries, other people, their rights, their autonomy, trauma, all of that stuff that is very real consequences. So when we have a society that's starved of talking about sex, about understanding what is acceptable, how to be safe, what consent is, what boundaries are, we have, things that are not, we don't have very positive outcomes from that. I'm wondering about what you think about all these things.
Oh, absolutely. And also, the second young person hits puberty, their body is literally producing sex hormones. They're called sex hormones. So they are going to have sexual feelings. They are going to have sexual thoughts. I'm not saying children should go and have sex, right? Like that is not what I'm implying at all. But I'm saying that if those are feelings that are coming up, and if those are thoughts, and bodies changing in a certain way, and they're left to their own devices, how it's actually violent that you're depriving them of potentially life-saving information. And yes, absolutely, this is something that I hear all the time as well, where they're like, oh, if we talk about it, it means that we're encouraging them to do something. But you're also talking to your child about other types of risks. You're talking to them, you teach them how to cross the road when they're about to cross the road, right? Like if you were to send them, let's say your child has to go to school independently by themselves, you will teach them how to get there. And whereas like when it comes to navigating something like having these sexual feelings or experiencing certain things, the thing that we resort to is shaming them and sort of pushing them to not look at that side of themselves with respect and with dignity. Desire is not a bad thing. Wanting to like explore your body is not a bad thing. And even if sex education is just about sex, it's just people talking about the right way to have sex. And I mean, obviously, the right way is there's no right way. And talking about all these good things that you said, like consent and boundaries, pleasure, understanding one's own body, anatomy, all those things. If it's just about that, that's enough. Just talking to someone about that one aspect is also enough, which is why like it was called the talk, right? Like the talk that like folks have with you. That is also like a great first step, I'd argue. And it's not just about how it's going to impact others, and you very rightly pointed out that of course all the things that you said are super important for us to have conversations around. But one big thing that we always miss when it comes to sex ed is agency of the person, agency of the young person over their own body, over their own decisions, their own, they need to be able to make decisions for themselves. That's really, you want them to eventually make decisions for themselves, right? You want them to be independent. So they need to have access to information, skills, and also the confidence that comes from a caregiver really, trusting you in that manner. And knowing that you can falter. That is not to say you always need to make perfect decisions. You can falter, and there will be a safe space for you to talk about those things. So yeah, what do you think about it as a mental health practitioner? Do you feel like it impacts a person's mental health when there aren't open conversations?
Absolutely. Sorry?
No, I said very, very leading question, but yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, when you were talking about shame, right? I think the topic of sex is encased in socially constructed shame. All shame is socially constructed. And there is no way that any kind of shame is helpful in helping people be equipped to deal with situations where, they have desire, to understand what their sexual experience is, to understand how to go about it in a safe way, because shame is that part of, it's the judgmental part of, society that's saying, oh, it's wrong that you had this thought in the first place, which is so at odds with the natural way that our bodies function. Like you said, like, the moment we turn a certain age, for most of us, we have hormones in our body, we begin to experience sexual feelings. So most definitely, when there's so much shame, there is bound to be guilt. And when we're really stuck in guilt, the idea of sex as being acceptable only in a marriage, only between man and woman, only between able-bodied people, only between, all these criteria that we get from society really makes us think that any other way of thinking about this, of talking about it, is unacceptable. And what does carrying that much shame and guilt do to people? Even if we look through comments on social media, there are so many people who feel absolutely ashamed, embarrassed, really burdened with guilt for even having thought about having sex, or for example masturbating, or for example watching content that had a sexual aspect to it. So I'm wondering what that does to the mental health of somebody who's thinking what they're doing is constantly wrong, that it's, that they're unable to control something that is coming to mind, or that they would like to know more about, because there's never been conversation about it. And that translates into so many areas. Like you said, agency. If I'm constantly guilting myself into thinking what I'm doing is wrong, how does that impact the way that I am in a relationship when I'm asking for something? Am I able to state my needs? Am I able to set boundaries? Am I able to have difficult conversations? Am I able to understand and have agency in what contraception, how safety, X, Y, Z? So it's really, so pervasive. And that's why I thought the best thing to have a conversation with you to really understand in what ways. Oh, are you here?
I'm here. That's fine. You're back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. When we were talking earlier, that there are these oppressive systems when we're thinking of patriarchy, when we're thinking of morality, these huge ideas that compound this feeling of shame and guilt to a place where it feels unacceptable for certain people and very acceptable for certain other people.
No, absolutely, Aisha. And I think, as you were speaking about shame and you were speaking about how, it's such a pervasive experience. It's not just shaming someone for what they're thinking or how they're feeling or how they may be acting upon those feelings. It's also shaming someone for who they are. So it's not just that what you feel is shameful, you are shameful. And that becomes, especially like you said, in the context of these oppressive structures of patriarchy and morality, it becomes so much more challenging. And as we speak, I see a bunch of folks write to us in comments and ask us, oh, is sex before marriage okay? I get questions like, oh, I have these type of feelings for this person, is that okay? I have feelings for a person of the same gender, what about that? Really, like, is there ever a right answer? Is there ever one answer, for something like this? Which is why, like, we always keep pressing upon consent and communication and care and comfort and look at all of these things. And, as long as these things are present, right, it's okay for you to explore your sexuality and what that looks like for you, and what that means to you, right? And it doesn't have to make sense of this, like you rightly said, these neat boxes of, okay, man falls in love with woman, woman falls in love with man, get married, have children, raise children, to get married and have children, that kind of thing. Like, of course, if that's how you feel and experience your relationships. And I have really, like, even within heterosexual marriages, it's not like this straightforward, right? Like, even where you have those scripts of what and those relationship escalators handed to you, it's not easy navigating dating, maybe as a woman who is attracted to men. It's not easy navigating any of those, but it becomes, like you rightly said, Aisha, even more complex when you're on the margins, right? And when and also you speak about like how oppression also has a tendency to get compounded. So that is where intersectionality also comes into play. I'm a Savarna woman. The way I experience the world is very different from the way, a Dalit woman would, right? So, no, I fully hear you when you also say how when we're questioning, and again, like coming back to what you said about communities of care and how it's not just this one individual's responsibility, and it's not even always, of course, we want policy level change, right? And of course, we want formal structures to intervene and to, for instance, say age-wise, grade-wise, incremental learning-based sex ed is going to be part of curriculum. Yes, absolutely want that. But also like informal spaces in the meanwhile, and even beyond, even when there is actual sex ed happening in schools, I would still argue that there is a need for this to be an ongoing conversation beyond classroom settings, and there is a need for this to be as casual as a dinner table conversation. Like, I mean, talk to your kids not just if you're not comfortable talking to them about pleasure, right? Talk to them about sexual safety at least. Talk to them about what type of options are available. You're willing to send, especially like from the very privileged slice of society that I have largely worked with, the kind of schools that I've worked with, right? Now these are children who young people, excuse the word, excuse the use of the word children, but young people who are going off to universities, but you've not had a conversation on something like birth control, for instance. You've not had a conversation on how not to be an abuser. That's an important conversation to be had. Safety is a two-way street, right? So I think it goes way beyond. It goes way beyond saying, oh, these set of parents need to have to talk with their children, or have this one-off session. And it really does impact folks of all ages, and it's also not something that ends when you are a particular age, or you've had enough sex, or you've had enough sexual partners. Like that doesn't mean that sex ed ends there. It may not look the way it does in schools, but I mean, there's always scope to learn more. And I was just looking at my insights the other day, and majority of the folks that follow me are over the age of 25. They're between 25 to 35, in fact. So that's very interesting that you still want to learn, and you still want to see. You also evolve as a sexual being, right? You're not the same person that you were like 3 years ago, 2 years ago. You're dynamic. So there's also scope for you to discover what that means to you. There's also scope for you to explore what that means to you.
Absolutely. And especially, in the context of course, all aspects of ourselves impact our sexual experience, and whether that includes bodies, and we're thinking about all these things, right? But also, I'm wondering, when you said dynamic, that we are dynamic, how our mental health also impacts our sexual desire and our sexual experiences. And I think that's a conversation that's really not had. About how our experience of depression or anxiety or any of these experiences that somebody may have really impacts the ways in which we approach sex, and the ways in which it impacts our sexual drive, and the ways in which it impacts the ways it impacts almost all aspects of your life. So why not this? And a lot of times it's not understood in that context of a larger experience that a person is going through. And I'm wondering whether you've come across something like this, whether this is actually part of sexuality education now, recently. But I feel like this is such an important aspect to cover, the ways in which our mental health also impacts our sexual experience. It's not just the other way around.
Oh my God, absolutely. I think that is also like from a lived experience perspective, right? This is definitely something that I live with depression and anxiety, and I'm on medication. I've been on medication for about 4 years now, and I've been on SSRIs. So the way SSRIs impact your sex drive, the way they impact your ability to express and experience desire. I mean, that's not something that was even told to me by my psychiatrist, who's fantastic, by the way, but still, like, it's not a conversation that we necessarily had, where he said, yeah, it'll impact your sex drive, right? Like, it may increase, decrease libido.
In the passing.
In the passing, but it wasn't really, Sonal, who's a dear friend, and who speaks a lot about, medication on their page as well. You must absolutely check it out. Is the founder of Boond. Is saying how antidepressants lower libido, but in my case, it really increased my libido, and it was fine because it was so confusing. And it decreased my appetite, which is like supposed to be, it's sort of supposed to be the opposite impact when it comes to SSRI, at least the known, popularly known impact of SSRIs, which is so interesting because it will impact each person's body differently. And yes, there may be, these known side effects, so to say, which may be impacting majority of the population, but it's also worth noting that I feel like I say this in every conversation that I have, but these side effects have been studied on white, cishet, college going, some American suburban college, someone. It's been studied, controlled studies happen there, right, on those types of population. So it's not really been studied on a body like mine, on an identity like mine.
This is definitely something you should talk about in every conversation.
Right, and even like, for instance, my queerness and the way that would impact my mental health, and that the way that would impact my sexual health then, right, it's all so interconnected, and it's unfair to say that these aren't conversations, these aren't important conversations, or like, the way a person, let's sort someone's mental health first and then we can think about all these other things. Or how can you think about sex when you're depressed? Excuse me, like what? And the other thing is, so it was PCOS Awareness Month last month, and I live with PCOS. Wow, I just had like these cocktails.
So do I.
But yeah, so I live with PCOS, and I really wanted to talk about how PCOS impacts your libido, which it does, which is not, again, something that PCOS care providers are talking about, for instance, because PCOS impacts your mental health. It impacts your perception of your body. It impacts your body image. It impacts how people look at you. Also this hyper focus on female fertility, and PCOS making that challenging can also impact the way you interact with, let's say, a partner with whom you're trying to get pregnant. So yeah, it's so important for us to have these conversations, Aisha, and I think I've tried to, and I also know that like other practitioners attempt to bring these conversations into the classroom as well, but it's not enough, I'd say. I feel like if I can study literally for the entire year a topic like trigonometry that I've not used once, I wasn't going to use it anyway, and here is a topic like sex and mental health that I am using every single day. Whether or not you have mental health issues, you have mental health that requires upkeep, understanding, maintaining, right? And whether same with sexual health as well. So yeah, so like why weren't those conversations had 700 times in the year? Why was it just like maybe that one conversation, if I'm lucky, with someone who's extremely judgy and is telling me that, if as a woman I put out, then I'm like an unwrapped candy wrapper, unwrapped candy, and like I'm somehow bad and mosquitoes will come and sit on me, and that is to be expected. Like those analogies which like dehumanize me and objectify me, right? Like if I'm lucky, I may get a session like that. So just like I think a lot of this conversation is me being really outraged, but rightfully so.
Rightfully so. Yeah.
I'm super happy that I see a lot of work now at the intersections of mental health and sexual health, at least at like a practitioner level, right? Like I have a lot of friends who are therapists, and I see them call me up, for instance, and speak about discuss what type of resources they are to forward to a client, or send a client to me for a one-on-one session because they're not comfortable talking about certain topics, because hey, practitioners are people too. and it's important to know your limitations. So I feel like there is some like camaraderie and like friendship between us, which is great, and this live is also an embodiment of that. But having said that, that's just again one very privileged English speaking slice of society, upper caste, upper class.
Yeah. I mean, and it's like you said, that I think the kind of work that you do is almost that you're counseling in another way about something that is as important. Like I said, like we said, there are these 700 conversations that should have happened when we were growing up. And so in that way, whatever kind of information people get access to, the alternate is porn. Or, you're hearing people speak about their experiences or what they know of it or their ideas of it. And I'm wondering what that does when it's substituted for actual information, when it's substituted for safe information coming from reliable sources. That when you're watching these perfect bodies, in these settings where it's almost always heterosexual, it's just a female and a male, and the female is fair and XYZ, and the male has certain kind of is looking a certain way. I'm wondering what that does to my ideas of what sex should be, what sex is, the ways in which I start embodying those ideas in my personal life. So I'm wondering what your experience with this is, or what your ideas about this is, because I feel like a lot of times porn is the easiest way to kind of have that conversation, because it's so open there, whereas it's really not open in any other aspect, any area.
Yeah. I think such a loaded question. The straightforward answer, porn is bad, but I don't think porn is bad personally, right? I also like, something that you said so beautifully at the beginning of our session, which is shame serves no one. And shame is never useful. So similarly with porn, if you are someone who watches porn, who's accessed porn, all of us have in some manner or form, right? I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing. I don't think watching porn is a bad thing. I think what is important is that we pay for the porn that we watch, because you think that it's free, but it's not free. What it is a very exploitative industry. But however, if you do, pay for your porn, and if that is something that you watch, adult cinema is not a bad thing. It can be an interesting stimulant. It can be something that you learn a thing or two from. And I mean, yes, you may also see a certain type of body. You may also see certain type of genitals, certain acts that may not necessarily resonate with you, and that is fine. You also get to choose, just like with films, there are genres. You get to choose a genre that is that makes sense to you, the kind of bodies that you want to watch, and so on, right? Yeah, in general is problematic. That's a larger conversation to be had. And porn is also a lot of paid porn is ethical porn is also sex work, and sex work is work. So I mean, having said this, Aisha, you're very right when you say it's not a substitute, especially when you're younger, and the kind of porn that is easily accessible, that is freely available, is not ethical porn, right? And that's the kind of porn that you might accidentally stumble into. Someone might show it to you. I remember, like, when I was younger, I was maybe in the 4th grade, 5th grade, whatever. I remember looking for pink clips, because that's what your girl was into back then, and it actually turned out to be porn, and that's how I stumbled upon porn for the first time. So cute and innocent. After that, I went and looked for things, but that's how I stumbled upon porn for the first time. And I wish there was someone that I could go to and say, hey, like, I watched this, and this is how I'm feeling, because I remember feeling really disgusted for some reason. I remember thinking, this is really wrong, and I'm really bad, and I'm really wrong. So I wish there was somebody that I could talk to. And parents always ask me, oh, I've caught my child watching porn, I've caught my child doing this, and what should I do now? I'm like, have you asked your child how your child is doing? Like, do you know what they've watched, and do you know whether they're feeling okay? Because maybe they were okay in the moment. Have you checked them now as to do you think they might want to talk to a professional to process what they might have potentially seen? It might have scarred them, right? That you can't like yell at a child for watching something that is so freely available and uncontrolled and unregulated on the internet, right? Like so I mean, let's not do that. Let's have a conversation on what's happening. And again, like porn can and is a sex educator in some way in our country, you know. Unfortunately that is the case. So yes, we do need to talk about, you know, again, age wise, grade wise, incremental learning things which goes on for the rest of one's lives, and we're able to, you know, talk about things like masturbation with our friends, and we're able to talk about it in a non-sexual way, and we're able to like do all of this. Yes, I want all of those things, but I also want to be again very alive to the reality that people are watching porn right now. People are watching porn right now as we speak, and someone just dropped out of this live to go and watch porn because I spoke so much about it, right? So that is happening. So how do we like meet people where they're at, and how do we you know, in the absence of you know, formal sex ed, how is it that we can maybe even be very revolutionary, maybe not right now, maybe never, but like how is it that we can potentially use something like pornography as a sex educator? I believe like one of the platforms that I don't support, which is why I'm not naming them, really famous platform, also came up with sex ed videos because they realized that a lot of folks were using it to learn about sex. And you know, there are fantastic directors like Erica Lust who make very educational, informative, you know, almost step by step kind of videos as well. So there is also room for that kind of conversation. There is also you know, scope for that type.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much guilt and shame around watching porn, like you said. And yet I'm thinking that, you know, when we're talking about ethical porn, when we're talking about feminist porn, when we're talking about the kind of porn that is representative of people, bodies, identities, XYZ, is such a recent development that really for a lot of us, like we said, you know, that the early images can be quite jarring. And when you said it can't be used as substitute, I'm wondering, you know, that was such an empathetic thing for you to tell the parent also. Have you checked in with your child? Because it can be very jarring for them. And just to check in with them. And also, I would be curious about, are you having conversations outside of this about sex and pleasure and, you know, acceptable, you know, ways of being, or whether that masturbation is normal, or all of these things that are natural? I'm wondering how much of a recent, and I think this is all to do with such an increased awareness and consciousness in society about even viewing this as sex work and sex work as legitimate. And, you know, all of these things are actually a product of, like you said, the incredible work that's starting to happen, you know, at that level. That we know that porn is not inherently good or inherently bad, but when it's substituted for knowing it in a larger context, a social context, a psychological context, a biological context, a sociocultural context, a psychosocial context, you know, on the intersections of this, it really becomes quite isolated, you know, for a child to make sense of it. And that's what I was wondering about, because when we talk about safety, Apurupa, you know, there is of course physical safety that's taken care of, you know, and that's been a primary focus for parents, teachers, adults, caretakers, anybody in that role. But I'm also wondering what psychological safety looks like, especially in the context of sexual experiences, because that is where a lot of people have negative experiences. That is where a lot of people leave with something that can be very traumatic, you know. And that safety is the foundation of all other experiences that we may have.
Absolutely. No, I love that you call it the foundation, right? Because the foundation also implies that grows into other things, and it touches all these different aspects of one's sexuality. And also, like, safety is always looked at as harm reduction. And yes, important part of safety. You don't want, like, for instance, if you're talking about physical safety, you don't want to get hurt. But that's not all that there is to physical safety. You also need to be able to communicate to someone that they can't do a certain type of act to you which may cause you physical harm. You need to be able to defend yourself. You need to be able to, you know, whatever, like, you know, if you're an able-bodied person, it looks like something else. If you're a disabled person, it looks like something else. So you know, similarly for emotional safety, especially in the context of you know, one's sexual explorations as well, it can't just be about harm reduction. It can't just be ki bhaiya condom pehen lo, like that. Please, can we move on from that? Yes means no, no means yes, means yes, no means no. All these conversations, I'm like, great. Can we also look at no, it's not true. Maybe some yes can mean, if no can mean 100 things. If no can look like, you know, someone saying I'm tired, or someone saying yada yada, and so on and so forth. Yes can also look like 100 different things. It also does not have to be enthusiastic, right? Like, all of us don't express enthusiasm the same way. It can look like different, and there has to be room for us to negotiate that on a daily basis, and for us to be like, for us to check in with each other in that capacity. So it also needs to move away. Safety needs to move away from just harm reduction. Safety also needs to be, again, like, coming back to agency, right? It needs to be like constantly respecting, constantly ensuring that it's safe for the other person to also say yes or no to me, right? It's not asking, is it a safe space for someone to be able to say, you know, yes or no. I recently worked on, you know, a series of videos where I was talking to disabled folks about what consent can look like. And I think one point that I thought was very pertinent to bring up is, as disabled people, we feel very vulnerable to being able to say no, because we're often taught that if someone even cares about you, if someone even thinks you're attractive, like, you bloody well be grateful, right? That's sort of what I've heard. I've heard that, oh, you know, don't talk about your autism, don't tell people will like judge you a certain way. But, and when I did, they're like, oh, then if this person likes you, then you need to be grateful. So how does one negotiate, you know, consent, and how does one navigate consent in situations like that? Is it just as straightforward? Yes means yes, no means no, it seems. I'm sorry. But if, like, platforms like, just going to name names, feminism in India are going to say, like, have these, you know, boring old conversations, then really, what are we getting at? Where nuance kahan hai? Right? So no, really, like, it does you know, these conversations, Aisha, need to move now beyond just these basic tenets of, like, what it's supposed to look like on paper and what it actually like when people are practicing it.
And I think when you say that, what you're really pointing to is not just this, you know, the semantics of yes and no and what that means and sounds like, but also to be able to have that conversation freely and make it a conversation, first of all, you know, to be able to explain and understand and question and, you know, express and assert all of these things without assumption that, you know, like you said, enthusiasm can look different, you know, no can look different, but not to assume that on behalf of the person that you're having sex with, right? And that's what I mean when I'm also talking about you know, safety in the context of even of course there's contraception, of course there's boundaries and yes and no, of course there's all of that stuff that we know, you know, is now spoken about. But I'm also wondering about anxieties, you know, which is a really real part of the mental health experience of sex, which is anxiety about, you know, a sexual encounter, anxiety about, for example, people are obsessed with the word performance, right? Or anxiety about what kind of ways I can ensure my safety. It could be anxiety about every aspect of that experience. So I'm wondering what those anxieties look like, if you could tell us some examples, and also what, in ways in which we can talk about it, seek help, and understand them. Because I feel like there's such a dearth of non-sexual spaces where you can have this conversation freely. But also that, what can I do in the moment to help myself through those anxieties, because they're very, very real and they're so private. You may be able to talk about an exam anxiety. You may be able to talk about anxiety in every other part of your life. But what about this?
Yeah, yeah. I think thank you for asking this question and also for bringing up the word performance. I do feel like there is wrong in performance. I feel like I'm saying really wrong things, Aisha, forgive me, but did I lose you? No. Are you here?
I think your video's frozen. Okay, you're back.
No, so saying some, great things, but hey, that's how it is. And
Mm.
nothing wrong in performance. All of sex is a bit of performance, right? There is nothing wrong in maybe doing that extra moan for your partner, or doing, as long as it's coming from that awareness that I am doing this with the purpose of wanting to present a certain way. The truth of the matter is, why is it that I wear I don't believe that I body hair is wrong. I don't believe that there's anything wrong with me as a woman having hair on any part of my body. I will still wax when I'm going to wear a dress, and I'm very cognizant, right, that I'm doing this because of what I've been fed, because of the media around me, also because it means that I will be desired in a certain way. I know that it's coming from that place, but I am still performing my femininity in a certain manner, right? And that's not necessarily always a bad thing. So stop beating yourself up. Firstly, it doesn't have to be the most authentic experience that you have. It's an experience like every other. It's not the most intimate space that you share with a person. I mean, of course, if that's your relationship with the space, that's valid, but I'm saying it's not inherently the most intimate experience that you have, that you can have with another person. And I think anxieties around what my body looks like, what it smells like, the sounds it's making, especially because we don't see representation of that either, right? Like, we may still see an odd like armpit hair, but you don't see someone, like, you don't hear someone queefing while, or even farting, like while they're, and those are like really normal bodily functions. That, and while I say that, I get extremely conscious when something of that sort happens, when I'm interacting with another person, even a long-term partner. Like, it makes me very awkward, and it makes me feel like I'm a lot less desirable. It makes me feel like I'm dirty. So all those feelings come up, and they're normal. And I think to be able to sit with those feelings and to be able to say, hey, like, I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, and this is what's coming up for me right now. And if you're able to talk to your partner about it, nothing like it to be able to tell your partner, maybe not in the situation, right? And maybe it doesn't even have to be a conversation that you have with them. You sit across the table with them and you have with them. It can also be a conversation that you just text them, which, if that's easier for you. And even when you text a person, or even when you have a conversation with someone, you get to set boundaries about how they react to it. I'll often tell a friend that if I share something with them, I'll say, hey, this is what I need you to say right now. I don't want your actual opinion on this. I need validation on this, or I need you to say things, or I don't want this opinion. I don't want you to opine on what I went through, right? So it's also okay for you to dictate some of that reaction that your partner is going to have, because it's such a challenging thing to communicate something like this, right? As well.
Yeah.
Similarly with friends, like, feel free to choose a medium that is comfortable. Feel free to ask for a reaction that is possible, feasible. Also, like, journaling is great. Talking to yourself is great. Looking at yourself in the mirror, practicing what you're going to say is great. Again, I shall keep coming back to, can we view sexual? Of course, it has its baggage. undeniably. When you say sex, it comes with the baggage. When I say sex, all of us have an image in our head, and it makes us feel a certain way. It makes some of us feel unsafe in our bodies. So all those things are coming up. Agreed, valid, and please hold space for that. But having said that, I think we need to move to a space where sex is just another thing, right? Sex is not a big deal. It's not the most intimate thing. It's not something you give or take. It's not something that you lose or gain. I think that's where we need to move, and I think on a personal level, even if it's a small step, and I call these small steps your power moves, because they really are your power moves. So even showing up to a conversation like this and witnessing a conversation, some of the things that we said are shocking. They may be normal for us because these are the these are our beliefs, and these are the kind of conversations we're having in our little bubble. But they're not very mainstream things to say. So even showing up to a conversation, witnessing part of it in itself is a great power move. And I'd also love to hear your thoughts on this, Aisha, about especially the whole anxiety piece, right? And anxiety, whether it's about one's sexuality, whether it's about sexual performance, or whether it's about an exam, it can manifest in very similar ways. So how does one then come back to that window of tolerance? How does one say that, okay, I feel unsafe, but I'm going to find a way to embody myself? How does one do that?
I think when we speak about anxieties, like you said, to be able to have that conversation freely also takes a lot, to be able to tell your partner or your friend, like you said, that format that you gave, to be able to say what you need to hear at that time. I think that also requires a lot of work to know what we need. And that's the kind of conversation that we're trying to have with when people come to therapy, or even in general, to get in touch with what it is that you need. I think when we're talking about patriarchy, we all also look at how people are put into certain roles. So women are supposed to be attractive. They're supposed to be not sexually promiscuous, but they're supposed to look sexual, and all of these ideas that really put a lot of people out of that circle and zone. When we're talking about those, we feel we're not living up to these XYZ things, like even the expectations from a partner, right? That can be really big for people. So that's when it's not an isolated conversation, and that's why a lot of the questions that we're getting also, we're not able to talk about them, because I feel like there's so much context and nuance that's required that it might be helpful for people to talk, to reach out for help, right? To professionals or to helplines, or because there's so much context and nuance that we can't say, like you said earlier, that anything is black and white. And it's very difficult to answer those questions without knowing exactly what's going on for the person. But when you recognize discomfort, like you said, the power move is to recognize. That is a power move. When you recognize that discomfort is when you will feel like you're able to do something about it, you're able to talk to somebody about it. You will try to find ways out of it. But to be able to recognize that in your body, it can come up as a palpitation in your heart. It can come up as, a thought that you had that really stayed with you. It can come up as any other part of your visceral experience that, you really register. And that's when I mean, there's so much pressure to align with normative ideas, of a lot of what society tells us, and it is very helpful to differentiate the self from these societal ideas. So when we have people writing in about these ideas that there's a societal idea that somebody should be heterosexual, straight, able-bodied. All of these are normative ideas, but every identity is valid, right? So when we feel this anxiety, it may have been because we're really subscribing to an idea it's imposed, it's not developed. And that is the difference to look out for, is something that I would think and say, but I would love to know what you would say about this, because I feel like the pressure, and when I meant earlier, of course, there is a performance, like you said, of the performance, the play performance. But what I'm really meant was also the pressure to perform in the sense of, feeling that a lot of people have anxieties about whether or not, what that experience was like for their partner, for example, or for them. Or, there are these anxieties that people are living with. And that's what I mean by unsubscribing to these normative ideas and really taking the time to reflect on things that are safe, things that are helpful, things that are, that align with your personal values, whatever they may be. Then there's no limitation, but the values must always be respectful of the other. And that's what we want to really develop in this society when we're talking about taboos. Mental health is a taboo, sex is a taboo. For example, uh, so many different parts of our
As
experience.
having here on the internet is a taboo, right? Us
It is.
having two folks, female presenting folks, having conversations like this, femme presenting folks is also, a taboo. So no, fully hear you, fully agreed, aligned with you on performance not being that of like roles and norms, but like absolutely play performance is something that is fine. Like all again, like to be able to distinguish between, authenticity doesn't always have to be, or honesty doesn't always have to be revealing every single piece of information about you either. So you and I have harped so much about conversations. We've gone on and on about how whether it's between a parent and a child, whether it's between partners, whether it's between friends, peers, no matter what your age, gender, sexual orientation, there has to be room for conversations. But again, like conversation is actually a really big skill. Being able to and I know that I'm someone, especially like if it's a conversation which is polarizing, I know that like my first, I will cry. I will inevitably cry, and I've learned to, I've learned how to not view that as my weakness, and for me to like talk through my tears and be angry and cry, right? Or to be outraged and to cry, and not view that in the same way every single, like grief tears, sadness tears are very, powerlessness tears are very different. I feel powerful and I'm crying, right? To be able to arrive at that space was something that took a lot of time and work and privilege, lots and lots of privilege from my end. So yes, you also pointed this out, Aisha, that like conversations aren't something great. Like go talk to your partner, but how? Right? Will my partner be able to understand what I'm trying? Will I be able to convey what I'm really feeling? And words tend to fail us many a times, right? So absolutely, I think, and again, like if we are able to view things like conversation, if we are able to view things like sexuality, sexual behaviors, all these things, including the upkeep of one's mental health, addressing thinking about one's mental health, all these things are skills. And all these things as something that you learn over a period of time. You bring it to your consciousness, and you look for resources, you look for you attend conversations like this, and you look at it as something that you will build over a period of time. And
Stepping stones.
yeah, with small stepping stones, starting with like the lowest hanging fruit, right? Starting to have this conversation with someone will just accept it the second you say it, and sort of building on that, like using that affirmation that you get from that space to build on conversations like this. Not saying go have this conversation with your, I just haven't worked up the courage to have this conversation with my parents. I'm still having these conversations on the internet with strangers, but still haven't worked up the courage to get there, and it'll take me a lot more time to get to that place. I don't even know if it's aspirational for me to get to that place. So really to view it again as a skill, and just because these are considered like the softer skills, the more feminine skills, they're not worth like investing that type of labor in. No, it's intelligence. You're not intelligent, or you're not skilled if this is something that you're not actively thinking about, and this is something that you're not working towards. So that doesn't obviously like solve anything for anybody, and like you said, so much context. But yeah, that's my tuppence on your question. I meandered quite a bit, but
No, I think everything that you covered was so pertinent. But I'm also wondering, we've spoken about anxieties, we've spoken about the intersections, we've spoken about, a lot in the area, and yet I'm wondering, there's so much that there is to this that it's almost feels like an uphill task to have this conversation in society, because we already see when people like you and me and everybody else who's having this conversation in society is it's not accepted, because we can still see people who are kind of writing things and they would say things, and because there is not that nuanced understanding. And I'm wondering, with all the work that you have done and are doing, what that ideal situation looks like for somebody working in the field, where this is an accepted, normal, casual conversation that absolutely anybody can have at any non-sexual setting and make sense of it. What would that look like?
I think that will look very, very, I hope, extremely different with each person that's having the conversation. It's so uniquely them. There aren't these scripts, right? And there is room for error, and there is room for someone to, falter, and for someone to discover as they go along. I think it looks like that. I think it looks like nothing I can imagine. And it looks safe and it looks consensual. That's all I ask for.
And it looks inclusive.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it looks fun. It looks fun. There's room for jokes and there's room for play. And it also looks like, people respecting boundaries. And should a person, for whatever reason, because we understand now that triggers can be anything. It can just be the way my eyebrow is shaped can be triggering for you, right? It doesn't have to be some massive something ho gaya, and trauma can be anything. So the source can be anything, the trigger can be anything. So, there's also, I hope in these conversations, this utopian world that we're imagining, when conversations are happening there's also room for someone to step back. There's also room for someone to say, a trigger warning for that, before you say something of that sort, and for them to not judge you for you asking something like this, right? So I think it looks very unique, and it looks like a lot of fun and safe and sensual. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here and having this conversation, Aparupa. It's been absolutely wonderful to just hear your brain thoughts and just have a conversation with you, because I think there's so much nuance that you bring in. There's so much experience that you weave into the way that you speak, and it's so brilliant. So I really, and I know of the kind of work that you're doing. So I mean, it's anyway commendable, and I'm so happy that you were part of the Mental Health Mela, and that everything that you brought in terms of even sharing your experiences, your knowledge, what you have known to be true, I think will hopefully help everybody who's been part of this live. And for everybody who's been part of this live, we do not want to answer questions, because I feel like it's very specific, if they are personal questions. So just to take that to the places that you feel like you might be able to get some support, help, in professional capacities and personal capacities, and to take care of yourselves in the way that you need to. But for us, just to be able to have this conversation was, for me, it's opened up a lot in the ways that I'm thinking also, some window somewhere. And thank you so much, Aparupa.
Thank you so much. Like, I also love the way you say my name. So thank you for saying it.
No, am I saying it wrong?
You're saying it right. That's actually how it's supposed to be pronounced. No, so thank you so much for having me here. And I'm so honored to be a part of the Mela, and love that you call it the Mela. And wonderful work to all of you. Please go check it out. Please go follow Dialogue for Mental Health. And that's really what it is. It's a dialogue, and it's two-way. And that's what I love. It's multi-way. That's what I love about the work that you do. And I'll be sharing some reels and of course the live some reels by Aisha and this live conversation. Of course, please go check her page out.
Thank you so much. And I will say everybody, I think if there are no questions, which I think there were only personal questions, so we may not be able to do justice to that. But I think we can end for the day and I'll let you go.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.